4 million people have security clearance. So let's take why the president did it aside. Do we need 4 million people to have security clearance?
No, and a lot of those are private contractors, and that's a very fair conversation about who has security clearances and why. We're not talking about that, though. We're talking about the most senior people with the most experience who you want to have, avoiding the stovepipe effect we saw in the run-up to 9/11, where we weren't getting dissenting views, where we weren't having people say, hey, I did this for a while. What do you mean you're hearing that? Let's kick the tires.
It's hardly like John Brennan is going to get called over by the White House to discuss national security. I mean, they hate each other.
No, but what he does is he provides a check on the people doing that job, and those professionals talk to each other. I go and talk to people who do my old job at the White House all the time, and we compare notes, and we do it without party affiliation. And what I can tell you is that there ought to be a Geneva Convention in politics, which is like the use of mustard gas, where you don't go after people who have risked their lives in the service of this country, you know, in a national security context, an intelligence professional, for some cheap political grudge. I mean, what if Barack Obama had revoked the clearances of everybody who led us into the Iraq War? Would that have been a smart thing or a bad thing in a way to just enact some retribution on people, when in fact what you want is you want those people out there saying, no, here's why we did it. You might think it was wrong, but you're trying to correct a policy that existed for some other reasons. That debate is healthy, and he is squelching it again, and it's wrong.
Okay, Elise, the debate is healthy, and there's an argument to be made. Maybe we need to revisit who gets security clearance and why. But the White House didn't give any of those reasons, right? This is about a political grudge. The president himself undermines Sarah Sanders. It's reminiscent of when the president sat down with Lester Holt and said, oh, here's why I fired James Comey, undermining his whole comms team. Isn't that what's happening here again?
Even when Donald Trump does something that there is a reasonable argument for, that when a former intelligence official has crossed the line from giving analysis to giving political commentary, that they shouldn't have a security clearance anymore, and I think that's a reasonable argument, but he's turned it into a First Amendment argument that is infringing on free speech. And so the way that he's gone about this is classic Donald Trump, and he's doing it for exactly the wrong reasons.
But it's also riddled with errors, saying they're going to take McCabe and Jim Comey's security clearance away, which obviously plays to president's base, as they would go, why do those guys have it? Newsflash, they don't, but you might not be aware of that because the president is lying to you. Eli, how problematic is it that the president basically admitted that the Russia investigation was the motivation?
I don't know how problematic it is for him politically, because everything is so hardened in terms of the partisanship, and he's been telling people that, you know, Comey et al. Are all out to get him for a long time. Brennan's been a vocal critic, which is really why his clearance was revoked here. I mean, the president, as you pointed out, this is a distraction. He also said, oh, I would have done it last week, but I was too busy. He was at Bedminster golfing and hanging out with bikers last week. So there's a lot of short-term reaction here. That's what this is. It's a short-term knee-jerk effort to change the news cycle. It's a feel-good measure. I mean, I hate to, I know it sounds like a lot of times when we talk about this president, we're talking about a child, but so much of these behaviors and these actions coming out of the Oval Office are driven by the president's need to sort of self-soothe, and people around him self-soothing. NDAs that we were talking about a couple days ago, non-disclosure agreements, really don't have any teeth. They're just to make the president feel better. And revoking clearances for John Brennan and others who don't even, many of whom don't even have them anymore, it's a measure to make the president, who can't stop the Mueller probe, feel better, to change the subject and to say, look, I did something. Take that. And it's not going to change what John Brennan says about him on TV. If anything, it's given John Brennan an even larger platform.
Well, the notion of self-soothing pretty much grosses me out. All right, Congressman, I want to share part of what the Wall Street Journal editorial quote is. The more effective and politically healthy way to fight back would be for Mr. Trump to declassify all the documents under subpoena from Congress about the 2016 election. Absent the full story that would provide the missing context, revoking Mr. Brennan's security clearance looks petty without accomplishing anything useful. Okay, so if the president wants to claim that Brennan was abusing his power, then why not reveal the documents that could prove it?
Well, that's an interesting bootstrap way to do something inappropriate, I guess. The point is that we have a special counsel who's looking at all of this, and we should let him do his job. The political witch hunt going on Capitol Hill to make the FBI the enemy or the Justice Department the enemy, which is an effort to reveal documents about an ongoing investigation, in no way is the conclusion you should reach because this guy's doing something inappropriate against John Brennan. I mean, my God, it is such a great latest example of how we're all golden retrievers and Donald Trump has the tennis ball, right? I mean, look at all the things you listed, from North Korea to putting kids in cages to the Omarosa tapes. I mean, I am old enough to remember when the White House couldn't prove or wouldn't tell us that he didn't use the N-word on tape. What was that, 2 days ago? And here we are talking about something else. And I just think that it is time to focus on what is actually going on, which is that you have a president who is casting about in a reckless and irresponsible way, and adults like John Brennan are doing something very unusual, which is that they are speaking up when their whole training has been to keep their heads down because they see what's happening to our country, and we shouldn't get used to it.
Okay, then take me inside the mind of the American voter. You speak to them every day. If the economy chugs along and jobs are better, why don't people care about all of these disastrous things that we've just listed off?
Yeah, look, the president understands something, which is that people are really busy, and it's harder to pay for their health care and get their kids to school, and it's really easy to just shrug your shoulders and say, I can't pay attention to that. And he overwhelms us with all this crap. But I do think those of us who are in this business have to stay focused. We have to stay focused on what's really happening. There are 500 kids who are not with their parents, and we did that. The North Koreans are building missiles. That's not going away. That's an existential threat to our allies in the region and to people who live in any American city once they miniaturize and perfect those ICBMs. We still have to stay focused on this stuff, and with all due respect to the reality show that the White House is becoming, I wish all these people would engage in this nonsense somewhere else and let some adults run our government, because we're all going to pay a price. This is not going to end well, I'm telling you. And the American people have to rise up when they have a chance. This election is so important for all these reasons.
And the cyber threat facing our upcoming elections is real, and we've very rarely heard the president speak about it at all. I want to turn for a moment to Rudy Giuliani, Elise. Now he's threatening, in an interview with Bloomberg, he's threatening Mueller, saying if he doesn't get the report done in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we will just unload on him like a ton of bricks. Write the damn report so we can see it and rebut it. I mean, do you actually think that matters to Mueller? Rudy Giuliani has been saying for weeks, months, this thing's going to get wrapped up in 2 weeks. Please.
Well, Rudy Giuliani has made so many just patently false claims and misleading claims about what's going on with the investigation that he doesn't really have a leg of credibility to stand on right now. And you look at how he continues to go out in public and just throw more outrageous claims, and no matter how outlandish, every single day. And you really wonder how he still maintains a law license. I'm not a lawyer, but I do think that there are general standards that should be upheld when you are practicing law, and it does seem like the constant lying is, shouldn't be acceptable to the profession.
I mean, like 5-6 years ago, I would have thought Rudy Giuliani was going to get a bridge named after him in New York City. This was our 9/11 mayor. Look at where he is now. Eli Giuliani also accused Mueller of, quote, doing a Comey if he lets this investigation drag into the election season.
Yeah, they're trying to raise the election as a timeline, a point in time where they either want this wrapped up now, they don't want it to affect the election, it's probably going to run past the election, but they don't have any leverage to tell the special counsel when he has to wrap this up. They're the ones who are stalling on answering and figuring out whether or not the president's going to sit down with the special counsel's office. Probably not going to happen, but they've been dragging this out as much as anybody. I mean, Rudy Giuliani has been so disingenuous about most of what he said on television that, to Elise's point, I'm just not sure why a lot of folks are continuing to listen to and interview him and put him on, because he's just not credible on this, and they just don't really have any leverage with the special counsel's office. What they're doing is a lot of bluster meant for public consumption, meant to harden people's perceptions who are already with the president and think that this is a witch hunt. That's really what they're out to do here. And as far as taking what he says seriously, it's very hard to do at this point.
Harden people's perceptions. President Trump's base is extraordinarily loyal. You have to wonder during these years and months, is he actually gaining any more support?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.